When the Chicago Bulls executed a sign and trade in the offseason of 2021 to bring in DeMar DeRozan, the thought was that DeRozan would be that added piece alongside Vucevic and the newly acquired Lonzo Ball to propel the Bulls into contention, having now assembled a quote-unquote big three. Now, while the price tag for DeMar and signing a 3-year, $82 million deal for a 32-year-old player at that time seemed a little steep, especially when you consider the fact that DeMar's game doesn't translate as well in the modern-day NBA that is so heavily focused on three-point shooting and floor spacing. But despite the uncertainty from both analysts and fans alike in signing DeMar DeRozan, DeMar has actually lived up pretty well to his overall contract value, even at his age. Having been an all-star in his first 2 seasons with the Bulls, last season being selected second-team All-NBA, putting up an insane 28 points per game on over 50% shooting, most of which were coming in the mid-range, as well as 5 rebounds and 5 assists per game. He even shot 35% from 3 on near 2 attempts per game, which was the best he's actually ever shot it from distance on that kind of volume in his career. And while DeMar still had a great second season, was still one of the Bulls' best players, a mid-range assassin, putting up 24.5 points per game, coming up in the clutch as he often does. Despite all of that, as the season wore on, it was becoming more and more clear that the fit overall between this roster was not working. Now, I wouldn't say that's entirely on DeMar, far from it. There were a lot of reasons for why the Bulls failed this season in even getting to the playoffs, but you can't deny that DeMar often slowed down the game playing iso ball in the half court, taking too many inefficient shots, and took shots and touches away from other guys, more specifically younger players who are looking to develop. The pace and space offense that a lot of teams in the NBA like to run was non-existent for a team like the Bulls, in large part because it's not conducive to DeMar's style of play. And while DeMar does still have one more year under his contract with the Bulls, in which he'll be set to make $28.6 million in the final year of his deal, and even though DeMar is still a very serviceable player, more than just serviceable, he's still one of the best scorers in the game, despite all of that, because the Bulls don't have a lot of avenues for creating meaningful change on their roster due to their payroll, ownership's unwillingness to pay for the luxury tax as well, and obviously a fairly underwhelming free agency class from 2023, it's most likely that DeMar DeRozan has played his last game in a Chicago Bulls uniform, and I'll explain why in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I know, generally speaking, there have been mixed feelings about DeMar DeRozan and whether he should remain on the Bulls next season and whether the front office should look to move on from him. And while there are obviously pros and cons to having DeRozan on your roster, namely for his scoring, his veteran leadership, the fact that he's incredible in the fourth quarter, usually, not always, but usually he's great in the fourth quarter, and by trading DeRozan, you need to ensure you're getting a decent enough of a return for him to make up for his lost production, whereas on the other end, the downside is you have a star player who doesn't play well on the defensive end, gets tunnel vision on offense, can make the overall flow of the game stagnant, and it's a player who is in their mid-30s now that isn't going to be a part of your long-term plans. And of course, as talented as both DeMar DeRozan and Zach Lavine are, the fit between them isn't the best when their overall skill sets and play on the court are pretty similar. And while I'm not a proponent of moving on from DeMar unless you can get a decent haul for him, I do believe the Bulls will have no other option than to trade DeRozan this offseason because of how stuck they are with their limited cap flexibility. Because here's the thing, I know a lot of Bulls fans are wanting to see drastic changes to this roster going into next season based on the disaster of a year that we just had, but the fact of the matter is, unless the Bulls decide to go into a full-blown rebuild where they trade DeMar, they trade Zach, let Vuce walk or execute a sign and trade for him, apply for the disabled player exception for Lonzo, basically try and free up as much cap space as possible, acquire draft capital, and develop their younger players. Unless they go that route, their ability to make changes is incredibly limited unless they decide to move off from one of the big three. And if you're trading Zach Lavine, given his age, the years left on his contract, at that point you might as well just trigger a reset button for a rebuild. But if the plan is for the Bulls to keep all of their big three, meaning they don't trade DeMar, they don't trade Zach, they re-sign Vucevic, there really isn't a lot the Bulls can do to improve around the margins. Add shooting, rim protection, and size, a floor general, all the things the Bulls need and what we've been talking about all season. And here's why it'll be a challenge. Now, the projected salary cap for this upcoming season, which is increasing from last year, is slated to be around $134 million. Now, say for a moment, none of the Bulls free agents re-sign or pick up their player options. Vucevic walks, Javonte Green walks, Pat Bev signs elsewhere, Coby White and Io, they get better offers from other teams and the Bulls don't match to retain them as restricted free agents, and Andre Drummond and Derrick Jones Jr. decline their player options and they sign somewhere else. It won't happen, like some of those guys are going to be returning, but say none of them do. The Bulls, in that instance, would only have a little over $16 million in cap space. That's if none of these players were to re-sign. Now, I don't profess to be an expert when it comes to the salary cap, cap holds, bird rights, etc., but I'll explain as best as I can, as I'm sure some are asking, well, how would they only have $16 million in cap space when you're talking about 8 players not re-signing with the team? You can barely sign one player these days for $16 million. How do you even fill out the roster? Well, that's the thing. Teams in the NBA are incentivized, as well as players actually, to re-sign their own free agents to retain their bird rights, which enables them to operate over the salary cap. Remember, the NBA salary cap is not a hard cap like it is for other leagues. And last season, the Bulls were an over-the-cap team. In fact, they were hovering right around the luxury tax line, not going over it, of course, because it's the Reinsdorfs, but they operated as an over-the-cap team, and by not re-signing their free agents, it's not like they're all of a sudden going to free up all this cap space. Take Vucevic as an example. He made $22 million last year. If he walks, it's not like the Bulls get $22 million in cap space by not re-signing him. No, because they were already operating over the cap. And when you sign new free agents, you are not able to use that salary to operate over the cap. You can only go over the cap with exceptions, like the mid-level exception, the biannual exception, and of course, re-signing your own free agents. So when people say the Bulls' cap situation and their future overall is grim, this is why. Because outside of a rebuild, you're mostly looking at running this roster back because there aren't a lot of options for them to get creative. And of course, we all know they won't pay the luxury tax. They're not going to go over that line. So outside of trades, the Bulls don't have much in the way of signing free agents outside of using their mid-level exception. Because I can guarantee you, both Andre Drummond and Derrick Jones Jr. are going to be picking up their player options. Based on the press conference from AK at the end of the season, the Bulls are also going to be prioritizing signing Coby White, especially considering Lonzo Ball is still going to be out for the foreseeable future. And that's going to cost them some money because Coby has played himself into a nice bag, especially if he gets a big offer from some team and the Bulls are forced to match. Already, you're talking about hitting the cap, as both Derrick Jones Jr. and Drummond would take up close to $7 million between the two of them, and I'm sure Coby is going to be getting more than $12 million. I wouldn't even be shocked if he gets somewhere in the range of $13 to $15 million based on the kind of money being thrown around at some players like Jordan Poole as an example. And this isn't even including Vucevic. Like, even if Vucevic walks and they re-sign Coby and Derrick Jones Jr. and Drummond pick up their player options, you're already operating over the cap. That's why when people say they are going to be forced into re-signing Vucevic, it's for that reason. You let him walk, you're not going to be able to have the ability to sign a starting center or even someone close to his caliber. And honestly, the same kind of applies to Vucevic. There aren't a lot of teams around the league that have enough cap space to sign him outright, and there aren't a lot of teams who actually need a starting center. So both sides are going to take a look at the market and realize, yeah, I guess we're going to have to come to an agreement on an extension. Now, I'm sure most of you are wondering, well, how does all this tie back to DeMar then, since that's the topic of this video? Well, it's because the Bulls aren't going to have much in the way of signing new free agents because, again, they won't have the cap space to do so. And if you don't make trades, you're essentially running things back with this current crew, which would be a disaster. Yeah, you could look to make trades to, say, guys like Andre Drummond or Derrick Jones Jr. You could explore sign-in trades for, say, Ayo and Coby, but sign-in trades are tricky to execute, and the last thing you want to do is get rid of younger players. Same can be said about making a trade for Patrick Williams or Dalen Terry, younger players who likely aren't even going to have that much in return because their trade value isn't that high, with the potential being a little more uncertain based on what we've seen from them in their early NBA careers. So where does that leave you? Trading one of your best players, your oldest player, who still has a lot of value, to get something in return for them as their contract is set to expire. Now granted, timing wise, it isn't the best because the Bulls could have gotten a hell of a lot more for DeMar if they had traded him this past offseason, coming off that All-NBA season, and the fact that he still would have had 2 more years left on his deal at that time. So yes, trading DeMar now, when his trade value is lower, isn't ideal, but he's going to get you the most value in return for any other player on the roster aside from Zach Lavine. Because again, DeMar can still ball. He's an elite scorer, great passer, still very crafty and athletic with his ability to get to the basket and draw contact. And while an expiring contract might not be attractive to some teams, for others, a shorter term deal for an older player rather than committing to long-term guaranteed money on the books is also a good thing. So for a team that is right on the cusp of contending, or is already there but they're just needing that second or third scoring option to put them over the top, DeMar can be that guy. And if you're the Bulls and you're looking to trade DeMar DeRozan, what do you want? Draft picks. The Bulls need draft picks, either just to build for their own future or finally having picks that they can actually use in future trades to upgrade their own roster. I mean, the thing about the Vucevic trade isn't so much the players that are coming from said picks that they sent to Orlando, it's the fact that it's limited them to even be competitive in trade talks for players like Kevin Durant or even Rudy Gobert, until obviously we realized we dodged a bullet on that one. So look, unless the Bulls are seriously considering running it back with the big three, which I guess we shouldn't be surprised if they actually do, if they bring back the big three, you're looking at the same crew from this past season with the limited cap space and trade chips they have available to them. And I'd have to think that after the fire AK has been under him for this poor season in roster construction, he's going to be forced to make a big move, even just for the sake of making a big move. And I think that move will be trading DeMar DeRozan at some point this offseason before going into training camp. I really do. But you let me know what you guys think. Do you think the Bulls will trade DeMar this offseason? Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.